Hello everyone, and welcome to NSTA web seminars, where you can find live, interactive learning at your desktop. Today's seminar is part of our Supporting the Implementation of the NGSS Through Research series, and it is titled Supporting the Implementation of the NGSS Through Research Professional Development. Our presenters are Julie Luft and Ana Houseal. My name is Ruth Hudson, and I will be moderating today's program. Let's get started with our introduction. I would like to introduce our presenters this evening. Ana Houseal is the Science Outreach Educator for the Science and Mathematics Teaching Center at the University of Wyoming. And Julie Luft is the Athletic Association Professor of Mathematics and Science Education for the College of Education at the University of Georgia. And now I will turn the program over to Ana. So Ana would like for you to tell us who you are, and you can.
Are you able to hear me now?
Do that by placing some of the clip art, which I've enabled, into one of these four boxes. Are you a teacher of science? Are you a professional specialist? A university? Yes, we are. I'll turn it over to you, Ana. We can hear you, Ana. You're fine. Go ahead and talk.
I think we have quite a delay here. That's what you get for living in Wyoming. So we're excited to share the information we have for you today, and we'd like to get an idea of who you are. So I see you're now putting the clip art in, and give us an idea of what you do. Great. It looks like we have people from all the areas. Okay, I am going to turn it over to Julie, who will do the next slide.
Well, welcome again. We are delighted to be here today to talk to you about professional development. And I just want to continue with collecting a little bit more information. And what I'd like to do is to know what is the most recent professional development activity that you've had. So we'll give you a minute or two to generate this information. Again, this will help us tailor our comments to you. So about 10 more seconds. Great, that's exactly what I needed to know. All right, so it looks like we have a nice variety of people who are in the online world, one person in the hybrid world, and a lot of people who are involved in face-to-face programs. So hopefully the comments that we're going to make tonight will apply to most of you, and hopefully they'll get you thinking of some new things about professional development. So to begin with, what I want to say is that professional development programs for teachers are changing, and there are two reasons for this change. The first is the nature of teacher evaluations, and I think a lot of you are experiencing this. For teachers in the classroom, their evaluations, right, are often linked or influenced by specific standards. For example, new teachers can be evaluated through measures that align with the Interstate Teacher Assessment or Support Consortium, INTASC. And these standards articulate, for instance, the understanding that a teacher should have about learner development, content knowledge, or instructional strategies. Experienced teachers may also be evaluated through similar standards and along with student achievement data. But another really important change that we're all experiencing is the introduction of the next generation of science standards. And these articulate what students should be able to know and do in science. And you guys are all pretty experienced in this. The NGSS, of course, as you know, were developed and reviewed by a large group of people, including scientists, science educators, teachers, and learning specialists. They've been adopted at this point by 18 states plus DC as of February 2016. The NGSS build on the work of the National Science Education Standards and are certainly a result of our enhanced understanding of student learning in science. The NGSS consists of some really important areas: science and engineering practices, core ideas, and cross-cutting concepts. And today we're going to address cross-cutting concepts. So these two changes, NGSS and evaluation, clearly require teachers to learn in new ways about how to teach. So, but I think the reality is that teachers are not participating in professional development as much as we'd like, and this isn't a bad thing. And I want to talk about this for a second. Horizon Research frequently conducts a national survey of science and mathematics education, and this is the results, part of the results of their 2012 survey, which revealed some really interesting findings about teachers and their professional development practices. If you look at this, you see that teachers on whole are not participating in professional development programs at the levels we commonly think they need to. For instance, if you look at this, you see that 80% of the elementary teachers have had 15 hours or less of science PD over 3 years. And let me see if I can do this. So right in here, oh, does that go? Yeah, right there. And if we see that middle school teachers, ooh, there it is. Wow, we're not getting any luck on this. Middle school teachers, actually about 75% of them had 35 hours or less of science PD, and we see that the high school teachers right here, that they had approximately 65% of the high school teachers had 35 hours or less of PD over 3 years. So in general, what we have are a lot of teachers who are not engaged in a lot of PD. And now it's not clear, and I want to be very clear about this, it's not clear if the low participation is a result of the time that teachers have to engage in professional development. We know that teachers are very busy, or if there are few opportunities for teachers to participate in science professional development programs. I think likely it's a combination of both. But this low percentage and this low participation has real implications for what we do in professional development. So, and it actually means that we really need to think differently about professional development. So for instance, we really need to create opportunities for teachers that are more strategic as they learn content knowledge. So this means that we really have to know the content knowledge that teachers come with and how can our professional development programs be adaptive. We also know that we have to really think about how teachers can access learning. And this means more online learning, like what we're doing here. This is going to be critical because teachers, again, may not have the time. We're going to have to think of new ways to present information to them. And finally, we really need to think about how we embed professional development just in daily classroom practice. And this is going to be a new challenge for those of us in professional development. So ultimately, professional development programs need to resemble how we teach in science classrooms. And this means that science teachers, again, as you know, are constantly attending to student knowledge, and we need to make our professional development programs just like that. Professional development specialists need to constantly attend to the knowledge of the teachers. So we're really in the midst of change in terms of science teacher professional development, with the standards that are coming down, with the evaluation expectations, and with the amount of time that teachers actually spend in PD. So, quick question. So as we look towards the future of professional development programs, these are some emerging areas, and I'm kind of curious, what areas would you really like to learn about in the future in terms of PD? So specifically, what are areas that we need to emphasize? Okay, this is great. We're actually going to talk about several of these today and give you some nice examples from research studies that we're familiar with. So thank you very much. And just to let you know, before we start on some of the details that are in this webinar, we'd like to let you know that this webinar draws upon 2 free documents. And the first is the NARS position paper, and it's on supporting the implementation of the NGSS through professional development. This was actually written by people in the NARS community for teachers. It's short and it discusses the areas of professional knowledge, professional development practice, and systems that impact professional development. The other document is the recent released Science Teachers Learning Report by the National Academies. And this is a comprehensive discussion that talks about, for instance, the state of science teacher learning needs, professional development programming, and professional development context. Both of these are essential documents in terms of professional development of science teachers, and we'll be, again, drawing on them today. So, at this point, I will turn it over to Ana.
Thanks, Julie. The first section, okay, it's not going to, there we go. The first section I want to talk about is professional knowledge and basically what it is. So there are several kinds of professional knowledge highlighted in the research literature, specifically the content related to the 3 dimensions of the next generation science standards that Julie was talking about, learners' needs, topic-specific knowledge, which is really digging into those specific topics that are taught, and assessment. We've chosen this time to focus this presentation on the 2 highlighted sections, cross-cutting concepts and learners' needs, as these are 2 areas of critical interest. There are actually many resources that focus especially on the NGSS and the 3 dimensions and assessment. So first, I want to point you in the direction of some of those resources in case you're interested in the other areas that we're not going to get into tonight. So as many of you probably know, since you're on this NSTA webinar, when it comes to professional knowledge in science education, NSTA is the leader. And the porthole that NSTA has provides access to more webinars, teacher examples, and articles specifically about the NGSS. So if you'd like to learn more about any of these areas, we suggest you start by digging into these and many other NSTA resources, including the resources that Julie just suggested. So within the 3 dimensions, the disciplinary core ideas, which is the content, and the scientific and engineering practices, the processes, it's really been easiest to wrap our minds as teachers around those 2. After all, within the National Science Education Standards, the AAAS benchmarks, and other reform efforts from the past, these are not new ideas. And curriculum and professional development have focused on these 2 areas. While the cross-cutting concepts are also not new ideas, they've actually appeared as themes in AAAS and unifying principles in the National Science Education Standards, and cross-cutting ideas in NSTA's anchor projects. They have actually not held an explicit role in the standards until now. So the development of the performance expectations that cover all 3 have really put more of a focus on these cross-cutting concepts. Because of this, they've been a little more difficult to focus on and implement. In order to help teachers deepen their understanding of these unifying themes and figure out how to integrate them, we've been using several tools in our professional development here in Wyoming, and I'd like to share a couple of them with you. It can be really overwhelming to think about all of the dimensions of the NGSS within teaching, especially for elementary teachers who, in general, have not had much of a chance to teach science in the past 15 years. One of the ways we've attacked this is by, first of all, identifying the key DCIs, SEPs, and CCCs for each grade level. In this case, this example is a map that we've made for the cross-cutting concepts. We found that it helps teachers of different grade levels to identify not only which of the cross-cutting concepts are focused on the grade level they're teaching, but also know where the other ones fall in the continuum at the K-5 level. This is meant to be a snapshot And Appendix G of the NGSS provides a more in-depth look at the progressions, which is appropriate to go to once the teachers have more familiarity, or participants. So the way you read this map, to the map to the left or to the right here, is that the grade levels are listed on the side and the cross-cutting concepts across the top. The check marks show the cross-cutting concepts that appear within a performance expectation at this grade level. The number in the parentheses indicates how many times it appears in the performance expectation. If there is no number, it only appears once. This helps teachers to identify both the scope of the cross-cutting concepts and the relative focus within the grade levels. As you can see, the key cross-cutting concepts for kindergarten on the top line are patterns, cause and effect, and systems models. It's usually fairly easy for kindergarten teachers to recognize and identify where they have focused on patterns in their cross-content teaching, and tying this cross-cutting concept to other areas comes naturally. Making these connections explicit is easier once they're identified. You'll also note that while patterns appears in grade 5, the main cross-cutting concepts for that grade are scale, proportion, and quantity, and systems models, with other cross-cutting concepts included. We have found that choosing one or two cross-cutting concepts to focus on initially makes it seem more doable, and as the teachers become more comfortable with the ones they use most, others are added in more easily later. The integration of the cross-cutting concepts could begin to happen with something as simple as including the concepts on a word wall that's referred to in all content areas in the primary levels, and creating thinking and writing prompts that focus on those connections throughout the units that are done in the different content areas. Professional knowledge. In addition, while the NGSS have made connections among the NGSS and the Common Core state standards, we've worked to show what this looks like in these areas and have included social studies in an article we just published this winter. Examples within this table focus on two of the cross-cutting concepts and their connections to language arts, mathematics, and social studies. In this example, the second example, stability and change, we've identified that in language arts, changes in language over time could be explored. In mathematics, the connection is making explicit that mathematics can help with the representation of the concepts. And in social studies, understanding and modeling things like economic growth and climate change are a way of directly connecting the cross-cutting concepts to this content area. We have used a similar approach with secondary folks. It's not that cross-cutting concepts cannot or should not be made and cross-content connections, but initially teachers have more control within their discipline, and even in discipline-specific courses, the connections among the disciplines should be made explicit. Again, the suggestion is to begin with one or two cross-cutting concepts that are easy to connect to current content. Develop ways of working those in before tackling more. Further, sharing these ideas with colleagues is a good way to move forward and make more connections. The next tool I want to show you is a visual representation of three-dimensional learning called for in the NGSS. In this tool, the left side shows the dimensions within a triple Venn diagram and contains examples of what these dimensions might look like in the classroom. First, in the larger circles alone, and then in the overlapping sections where the two meet. Finally, in the center, where all three reside, which is where you would expect to find the performance expectations. On the right side, the tool is blank, so it can be used to map lessons or activities within lessons to help visualize where they fall. In this way, teachers are able to figure out what needs to be added or changed to get the lessons into the center. So for example, if they have a lesson that's really focused on a disciplinary core idea and a scientific and engineering practice, they can then use this to look at the cross-cutting concepts and figure out where they can match it up and move it towards the center. Again, this takes us back to the initial content, my initial comment about the relative ease of identifying and teaching in combination the DCIs and SEPs, so the content and the processes. with this tool, identifying which CCC is most applicable within the lesson is easier, and then hopefully easier to remedy. I believe that Ruth has a link to where this can be downloaded for free. So hopefully she can put that in the chat box while I'm talking and while we do this next poll. So this poll, I'd like to elicit from you what your biggest concerns are related to cross-cutting concepts. And I'm going to turn it over to Ruth to gather the data.
Thank you, Ana. I've gone ahead and enabled the poll for you. And so what I'd like you to do is just go ahead and respond to what are your biggest concerns related to the cross-cutting concepts? Is it A, specific cross-cutting concepts? B, integration across the content areas, I'm sorry. C, integration interdisciplinary. D, three-dimensional learning, or some other. And if you choose E, please write in the chat box what your specific concern is. I'll give you a couple more seconds to respond to that, and then I'll publish those results. I'll lock the results, and then I'll publish them to the slides so that Ana and Julie can see the results. So I'll give you a couple more seconds. I see some people still responding. So remember that the poll button looks like an A, and it's a drop down, and if you're on a mobile device, it's just a little different, but you still can use the poll tool. So now I'm getting ready to lock the poll. Responses are locked, and so now I'm going to publish those to the whiteboard. And I'll turn it over to you, Ana.
Okay, thanks. See, the poll indicates that people are concerned with B. And no concerns? Or actually, are you seeing anything in the chat box, Ruth, about other concerns?
I am. I see a lot of B's and C's and some A's.
Okay.
So it looks like, yeah, they're really concerned with the integration.
Integration. Okay, and I really would like to make it clear, too, that it isn't just when you're working on performance expectations for the next generation science standards that you should be thinking about cross-cutting concepts. But one of the reasons that I included the examples about using it across the content and within the disciplines is because it's something that you should be thinking about tying in all the time. So I hope that clears things up. I believe we're ready for the next section is professional knowledge, and I'm going to focus on all students can learn. So in my own teaching experience, I found over and over that what's good for ESL students, special needs students, and talented and gifted students is generally good for all students. I actually started my public school teaching career as a special education teacher and finished it as a middle school science teacher. And in my science classroom, I had a huge range of students with a larger range of needs. I also had many ELL students. I found that I was deliberate about making sure that the material was accessible to all my students, like providing translations, including a safe and classroom environment for everyone to participate in discussions, including my nonverbal students and my students who didn't speak English as a first language, and investigations, and also in investigations, and offering a variety of assessments. And when I did this, they all did fairly well. In addition, I was critical to make sure that I was taking into account the fact that each of my students bring in their own experiences to the classroom that can be used to build new knowledge upon. In my planning, my goal was to determine and use this to teach. Research also tells us it's critical to take into account how student knowledge needs to be built. This includes the understanding of preconceptions and also the understanding of the historical context of any related discoveries. What I mean by this is that many of the preconceptions that our students hold were initially held by other people. For example, plate tectonics theory was one of the things that was really hard to move people into thinking about plate tectonics because they had other ideas about it. Many physical science topics, including falling bodies, are another one where you start with a preconception that's really similar to historically how science was thought of. So these may be stepping stones to higher levels of understanding in these concepts. The two examples I want to share with you in this area are the use of assessment probes and a resource for teachers of ELL students. So this first one I'm going to talk about is some probes that have been developed by Paige Keeley and others. And I want to note that there's a webinar available from NSTA that goes into depth about these probes. And it's not my intent to do so here, but instead to highlight the ways I've used them in teaching and in professional development. In addition to using them in the classroom, I've used this particular probe to help teachers develop their depth of knowledge with a particular concept that they usually think they understand pretty well, complete circuits. I found over the years that even people who say they understand it are at a complete loss when they're given a battery, a bulb, and just one wire. I use the probe at different points depending on the group I'm working with, but in all cases, developing a deep understanding of current flow and complete circuits is the goal. In the process of doing this, I found that participants are able to see how these probes help them identify their own gaps in knowledge or their own preconceptions, and therefore how they could be used in the same way with their students. I found this to be highly effective with a group of principals when I was trying to show them some of the difficulties and complexities of teaching science, and they definitely came away with that. The second example I have is from eCALLMS, the website that eCALLMS has. eCALLMS stands for E-Learning Communities for Academic Language Learning in Mathematics and Science, and it's a large project that's striving to support teacher development of linguistically responsive practices. By offering free, accessible, and flexible online resources to support professional learning communities of teachers, eCALLMS is offering exciting opportunities for teachers to improve their practice with bilingual learners. You can see from this screenshot of the page that each of them starts with an essential question, and then the units themselves are ones that you can work through in a group. They're unfacilitated multimedia resources for professional learning communities. The flexibility of this online learning site allows for groups of teachers to attend and work through an e-workshop on their own timeline. And you'll note also that the link to this is at the bottom of this slide. So now we're ready for a professional knowledge poll. I'm going to turn this over to Ruth to do.
Thank you, Ana. So I've enabled the clip art tool, and if you could just place some clip art in one of the three choices, and we are answering the question, do your current professional development experiences focus on the cross-cutting concepts or student learning? And so if it's yes, please place your clip art in yes, no, or if it's just really not applicable to your situation. And I really appreciate those of you that have started placing the clip art. For those of you that are searching for the clip art tool, you should notice to the left of your screen that there's a toolbar, and the clip art tool is the bottom icon. And you can select and place whatever you want. I'm going to turn it back over to Ana.
Thank you, Ruth. I'm really pleased to see how many yeses there are in this. I was expecting to see fewer yeses and more no's. So that's good to see. It's very exciting. Okay, I think we're now at a question break. We're going to look at and answer some questions for professional knowledge. So I'm going to turn that back over to Ruth to gather the questions and let me know what they are.
All right, thank you. So you can type your questions into the chat, and then Ana will be able to read them, and then she can just respond. Ted Dart has already helped us out by just telling us that the questions are typed into that chat window. So if you have any questions, then type them in. It looks like Chris Taylor has said difficult because we focus on students, but not on the cross-cutting concepts. So I think maybe he's just making a comment. But do you want to add to that, Chris? And I'll turn it over to Ana to answer these questions.
Okay, I'm watching the chat box. I'll give you about another minute to type anything in. Chris, did you want to add to anything to that? Okay, suggestions on how to start PD with cross-cutting concepts is what Chris was asking. Sometimes what I've seen in professional development workshops is I actually know of one math science partnership in Iowa where the entire professional development started with a cross-cutting concept instead of content, which is the usual way it goes. It's been difficult to do because of some of the reasons I mentioned. Okay, I'm trying to pick to recommend. So Jake asked, how often do you see value in showing the class results to an assessment probe as a class as a whole? Jake, usually when I'm using the assessment probes, I use it in a way that the person who has the probe itself is the one that sees it versus sharing it with a whole group. And partly they can share it in small groups. Partly it's because it can be really embarrassing to realize you don't understand a concept very well. I'm going to answer one more. So I'm not quite sure how to answer your question, Terry. Do you find that teachers unfamiliar with the NGSS and framework are resistant to focusing on professional knowledge? I've been working with teachers unfamiliar with NGSS and the framework, but they have never been resistant to focusing on professional knowledge. They're all, and I have to say they tend to be self-selected groups so far, because in our state we haven't yet completely adopted the standards, and so the people who are involved are the ones that are the early adopters. And so it's probably going to change as we get into things being mandated. I think I'm going to stop right now and turn it over to Julie.
Okay, great. Thank you, Anna. That was insightful and perfect. So the next part of this talk is going to be about the design of professional development programs. And it is really important to think about how we design programs, because how we design a program impacts how teachers learn, which impacts how students learn. And so if you're involved in professional development or programs, or if you're a teacher who's taking professional development programs, or if you're a person who studies professional development programs, it's really important to know what are the features of well-designed programs. So what are those features? And we're really fortunate, again, the recent publication of the Science Teachers Learning from the National Academies does a nice job of discussing some of the really important features in professional development programs. Ana just talked about the role of professional knowledge and touched a little bit about practice, and again, there's more information out there. They also, in the document, talk about the differentiation that's needed for teachers, and they also talk about the embedding the professional development program in the work of teaching. So I'm going to talk about these two in the context of this section, so just hold on for a minute. And the other areas are, they talk about the importance of professional development being coherent. And when they talk about professional development being coherent, they mean that the professional development program should be aligned with the content that the teachers are teaching, probably also aligned with the curriculum or the outcomes that are in the school or the district. So having some coherency or agreement is really critical. Also important is what we call collective participation, and that is where teachers work together in order to improve their practice. So teachers in teams at a school, or teachers even across schools who are teaching the same curriculum. And finally, another important area is just having the opportunity to do experiment and reflect. So when teachers get opportunities to try something and talk about what works or doesn't work, that's really important. So these are some really important features that really well-designed professional development should have. And I just want to make the point that these areas aren't always exclusive. Often they're interlinked with each other. But I want to talk about two. And so the first one I want to talk about is differentiation. And differentiation, when we think about it, we can think about it on 3 different levels. So at one level, it can be the teaching level, and that means if we think about content knowledge, typically elementary teachers need to build their content knowledge in all the different areas that they teach. And as we know, elementary teachers have to be experts in a lot of content, so we work on building their knowledge. Middle school science teachers often need to enhance their knowledge in the areas that they teach. So again, the professional development would have a little different angle towards the content. And finally, high school science teachers often need to extend or deepen their knowledge. So when we look at professional development programs, it's important to consider how knowledge is represented depending on typically the grade band. But I just want to, these are very broad generalizations, but I think my examples just speak to the different ways that teachers need to build their knowledge. So another important aspect of differentiation can be experience. And for instance, new teachers, of course, need a different professional development experience than experienced teachers. So we're thinking more and more about this, and this is becoming an important issue that we have to consider. And finally, another area of differentiation occurs in terms of the outcome of the professional development practice. So its professional development is quite different for a teacher who wants to develop curriculum versus a teacher who wants to become a teacher leader or a department head. And I'm going to talk about this too. So it's important in professional development that we think about the outcome. That is, why is the teacher participating in the professional development? It's towards what end? So again, professional development programs need to be differentiated, and they also need to accommodate different teaching levels, different experiences, and different growth trajectories. We're really understanding this more than we've known before. So I want to give you 2 examples from the research that talk about differentiation and highlight what the impact of this differentiation is. So the first example pertains to newly hired teachers. So as we know, when teachers graduate from pre-service programs, they're well armed with all of the latest strategies and new knowledge. And they have a lot of support from their science teacher education program. But when they hit that first few years in the field, they often don't have that deep science education support that they're seeking. They may have a mentor, or they may be meeting in groups. And sometimes what happens is, what we see is that teachers lose contact with some of the science that they need to teach as they're newly hired teachers. So the premise of some of the work that I've done is that if we were to actually kind of disrupt this model, what if we gave newly hired science teachers access to induction programs in science that were as rich as the programs they had in their pre-service teacher education program, and that purposely link them to being an experienced science teacher. So ideally, an induction program in science could create a seamless transition from pre-service to experienced teacher. So with that in mind, we actually tried this. What we did was we found 100 new science teachers, and we put them into one of four conditions. 2 of the conditions, which were induction programs, focused on this deep teaching of science, and it was of science teaching, and it was designed just to support teachers in their first few years. So an induction program just focused on how do we teach science. The other 2 conditions were around the professional development programs that were offered at schools. And often those programs involve a mentor, and they often are very general. They focus on classroom management or learning some of the procedures in the school. So we followed all these teachers from their first year, and we had them in the different induction programs, and we watched them teach, and we also talked to them about what they were experiencing. And at the end of 2 years, we went back and looked at all the data, and then at the end of 5 years, we went back and looked at all the data to find out how the teachers were teaching. And what we found was at the end of 5 years, the teachers who had participated in the science-specific induction programs were actually creating more student-centered interactive classrooms that were really focused on science. So somehow creating an intervention, an induction program that was focused on deep science teaching actually continued their practice. So that's an example of differentiation. Another example of differentiation is an emerging area which we're calling science trajectories. And trajectories actually suggest that teachers need specific knowledge in order to build out their potential or where they're going to be going to. So for example, if I'm a new teacher, I may eventually want to be do something really stellar in the K-12 setting that I'm working in. I may want to be a curriculum developer. I may want to be a department head. Or maybe over time I decide I want to go into higher education and be a professor. Or maybe I want to be involved in policy or work at a museum. So developing along these trajectories, if a new teacher, an experienced teacher are going to build their capacity along these trajectories, we can actually look towards research to figure out what kind of knowledge, practices, and cognitive attributes they need to develop over time. And Jeremy Peacock, for example, did a great study that looked at department heads, and he asked the same question, is what is it a department head needs to know and be able to do to be successful? And so he's actually articulated the knowledge, practices, and cognitive attributes that make department heads successful. So we can put this into a trajectory so that beginning teachers, and as they go along their careers, they can think about building towards these areas. So I'm kind of curious, and I can turn this over to Anna, or I'm sorry, excuse me, turn this over to Ruth. And Ruth, if you want to collect some answers from some of the participants about if they're participating in career-specific professional development, that would be great.
I would love to, Julie. I've enabled the clip art feature again, and so if you could give some input to our presenters, how many of you are participating in career-specific types of professional development programs? If you are, answer yes. If you're not, or if it's not applicable, if you could fill that out for us, and then I will turn it back over to Julie. It's all yours, Julie.
Okay. Okay, that's great. I think this is something, again, it's good to see. It's something that we all need to think about, and that's clearly evident. So how can we support our own learning towards what end? So it's exciting work, and this idea of differentiation is important. So the next piece I want to talk about in terms of the design of professional development practice pertains to how professional development programs actually embed in the very work of teaching. And it's important that professional development programs connect to teaching. And one way that they can do this is that when professional development programs are structured, they can align with the curriculum that's in the schools, and they can actually focus on revising this curriculum. Another way that professional development programs can be embedded in practice is that they focus on student learning of the topics that are being taught in schools. So if teachers are participating in a content-specific professional development, it's important to also bring up some of the ideas that students might encounter when teachers are teaching those topics. And I'll talk more about this. And finally, this idea of being embedded in practice means that it's really important that teachers get opportunities to work together to examine the very nature of their teaching. I'm going to give an example of this. So one of my favorite all-time studies is by Joan Heller. And Joan Heller did something that really gets us thinking about the value and the importance of looking at student work. So what Heller and her colleagues did was they found 270 elementary teachers, and they assigned them to 3 conditions, professional development programs. One program involved teaching cases, and these teaching cases were all about building conceptual knowledge. The other thing she did was she signed another group to a professional development program that involves looking at student work. So in this program, the teachers were also analyzing the student work that might emerge as a result of the professional development program. And the final professional development program that she developed and assigned teachers to was a program that had teachers think about their own thinking in the midst of the professional development program. So one was on teaching cases, which focused on concepts. Another one focused on looking at student work as it related to the content that was going on in the classrooms. And the final one was looking at how getting teachers to think about their own learning. So what's really interesting, and I'm going to see if I can do this, is you can see that, no, I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but you can see that if you look under the teacher content knowledge, you can see that all of the programs, the teaching cases, looking at student work, and metacognitive analysis, all impacted teacher content knowledge and student content knowledge. That's delightful, and that's really important. But however, and this is really important, when you look at just the teaching cases and looking at student work, you start to see that the accuracy and the completeness of student justifications improves. So the pieces of looking at student written justifications in the study year and the follow-up year, we see that students are able to justify their thinking when teachers look at student work and when teachers are looking at concepts. This is really important. This really stresses that professional development programs need to draw on students' ideas and student work along with teaching of the concepts if they're going to support student learning. So it's a great study. One of the other really important pieces that we have when we talk about professional development practices, professional learning communities, and I'm certain a lot of you participate in these. And PLCs, as they're known, they have their roots actually in the early TIMS work, where when the TIMS researchers saw that in certain countries students were learning in ways that we hadn't expected, they went over to those countries, and one of them was Japan, and what they found was that Japanese teachers have a whole different way of studying together in order to improve their teaching. And in Japanese lesson study, what happens is teachers plan lessons together, a teacher actually will teach that lesson, and then after the lesson, all of the teachers will talk about how the lesson was structured to support student learning. Powerful, powerful professional development. So when this was first observed, it was groundbreaking, and it really started to impact how we think about professional development in the U.S. And you can see on the left as an example of a classroom in which lesson study is occurring. So both Heller and the research that we see about professional learning communities, they emphasize how important it is that we think about the practice of teaching, which is thinking about students' ideas, or actually teaching, how important it is in the very daily work of teaching. So I'm going to turn it back over to Ruth to actually do another poll for us. So.
Thank you, Julie. All right, we have one more poll for you, and you can use the clip art for this again. How many of you are participating in a practice-embedded professional development program? If you are, select yes, no, or if it's not applicable to you. And thank you very much for responding. We really appreciate everyone that takes the time to respond to these polls because they really help give direction to the rest of the web seminar. I'll turn it back over to Julie.
All right. I'm waiting for these responses to trickle in. That's great. All right, well, something to think about. I think the data is actually pretty compelling about embedding professional development work in classrooms and working with colleagues. So just something to think about. If you're a professional development person who designs professional development, how can you do that? Or if you're a teacher who's taking it, just making a mental note that you want to think, wow, is there a way that I know that I'm going to be looking at student work, or how does this connect to my own practice? All right, so I'm going to turn it back over to Ruth to collect some questions, and I'm happy to respond to them about professional development practices.
Perfect. So if you have any questions for Julie at this time, if you could type them into the chat window, that would be most helpful. And Julie, about how many questions would you like to answer?
I'd like to take about, I can take one or two.
Okay.
That would be great.
It doesn't look like anyone is typing at this time.
That's okay. If anybody has one question or one comment. Okay. Yep. Oh, that's a great question. You know, I don't know the answer to that. How about that? But I would be happy to, you may know. Does anybody else know? Is there any research about the group size for PLCs? You know, my first thought is it's probably more important to have a collective group that is really working diligently on a task of teaching. So, oh, another great question. So I don't know. So Ted, I really don't know about that. Now you guys are all, let me see what happened here. Yes, I don't know, but I'm happy to put some really nice studies that have come up. There's a lovely study that just came out of Chicago where a group of teachers got together collectively and really started studying, and they were actually working in a low SES school district, and the students and the teachers have just, the student learning is just moving along exponentially. And what references would resources for a new teacher to refer to? They're aspiring to be a department head. Read Jeremy Peacock's study. You can certainly email it to me, and I'm happy to give it to you. It tells you exactly what kind of attributes would be great if you wanted to be a department head. And finally, I'll take one more question. What advice do you have for teachers whose district PD doesn't align with this research? I think that's a great question, and that probably happens more than we think. But I think it's really important if you're involved in PD, you can suggest these two documents. I think the NARST document and also the Science Teachers document. Just say, hey, look, I was on an NSTA webinar, and this is what they're talking about in terms of PD. Maybe we should look at this and think about it. You know, I think that's a great thing to do. There are great resources out there, and you know, as much as we study our classrooms, we need to study our own PD. All right, I'm going to pass it on to Ana.
Thanks, Julie. That was really interesting research, and I really like how you connected it to practice. And also, I just want to make one comment. When you were talking about the trajectories, it made me think about the progressions that we've started to come up with in science education as well as other areas in terms of looking at kind of what the steps are along the way, and to think that that's sort of a parallel to what you were talking about in terms of trajectories for teachers. I know that when I was in the classroom, we didn't think in that way at all, and it would have been nice to have a trajectory like that. So this section, I'd like to talk about systems that impact professional development, and the research papers that Julie has mentioned and that we have based this on have identified these 6 systems that impact professional development. So critical to our current reform efforts are the materials and the PD providers being familiar with the NGSS and the vision of the framework. In addition, the importance of involving key stakeholders, especially administrators and principals in that category, and pre-service teacher programs are well documented. While I could talk about all of these things, I plan to focus on today rigorous evaluation and resources. So first, I want to define what I mean by evaluation. While this word is used colloquially and in education to mean different things, including the testing of students and rating of teachers, in the sense of professional development, it's a methodology of gathering key information that can be used to provide feedback and more information about the effectiveness of the professional development and ways to help facilitators understand and respond to the needs of participants. So I have 2 examples I want to focus on here based on our own research and professional development. And I'm going to look at the the CBAM and the SEC in ways that we've used that. All of these things we have used, reflexive responses, content assessment, and curriculum evaluation, but I'm going to focus on these two. So with the NGSS and the vision of science teaching requiring a lot of change, since we know that change often requires not only gaining new skills, but shifting one's attitudes and beliefs. And I believe I saw a question about resistant teachers, so that sort of goes along with the attitudes and beliefs. In our PD programs, we've been using a modified version of the concerns-based adoption model to help us navigate these shifts. So the section of the CBAM that we focused on focuses not only on participants' concerns, but also their confidence and commitment levels. So at the beginning of every workshop, or prior to every workshop, we have the teachers fill out online a survey showing their commitment, their concerns, their commitment, and confidence. In each of these areas, they also include a qualitative sort of statement about why they've ranked things the way they have. And usually we focus it on something very specific that we're really emphasizing during that particular professional development workshop. And then at the end, we collect this data again. We've managed to put it all into like a Google form, so it's really easy for them to do on their mobile devices, and we've been getting really good feedback from them. So this example is actually from a January 2016 workshop in which the emphasis was on integration of critical thinking skills into NGSS-focused and aligned curriculum lessons and units. As you can see from the two graphs, the pre versus post workshop feedback indicates that the teachers' concerns have decreased and their confidence has increased. There was another graph that also showed that their commitment had increased. In addition to the numerical values, when we look at their responses, their qualitative responses, that helps us guide us specifically to what types of concerns they have or what's adding to their confidence. And it really helps us plan for the next workshop. Another tool that we've used is the surveys of enacted curriculum. It's a several hundred question survey, so it takes quite a while to do, and we actually plan in time during the professional development workshops so that they get paid for doing this. And it's a tool that we can use and also we can use with the teachers. So teachers can look at their own data individually, or we can look at it as a group. So in the MSP that we're working on right now, these participants have filled this out once a year, and we've used it to assess changes in the content and pedagogy among the teachers. We can also use it to determine whether or not the content changes match the goals of the PD program, which includes the alignment of the district curriculum to the NGSS. These examples highlight two areas in which the content was built and changes the participating teachers made in their own classrooms, both in time on topic and cognitive demand on what teachers do is displayed here. So the third grade is on the left side, the third grade analysis for just one area. The ecology topics, you can see, were not widely taught in the 2012-2013 school year. The survey is filled out after the end of that year. But after unit development for specifically the bundled standards in this area, you can see significant changes have been made in these classrooms. Of course, ecological succession, you'll note, is not taught at all, but it's also not part of the standards. And so that's what we expect to see. We don't want to see content being taught in areas where they're not supposed to be teaching it, but we should see changes where they are. For the sixth grade on the right, it's most interesting to note that a complete area of cognitive demand, which was analyzing information, was being overlooked within the teaching. And now it's well included within the instruction. And so you can also see that there's definitely a difference in the amount of time that's being spent. So in terms of resources, our two biggest commodities are time and attention. They will always be the key aspects that there are not enough of, followed closely by lack of adequate funding. In terms of time, the focus should return to the ultimate goal of professional development, teaching and learning. There are two ways to think about time. You can cover a large amount of material in which students walk away with a small percentage of the desired outcome, versus covering less material and having students gain a higher percentage of the desired outcomes. The latter in the long run is more desirable. In our experience as well, bundling the standards not only within science, but for elementary teachers across the content areas is another way we've been able to deal with limited time issues. In addition, concerns about student preparation for high-stakes testing have been alleviated in these situations. In one school a couple of years ago, we ended up with a natural, unplanned experiment. There were 2 6th grade teachers, and one of our teachers was in the PD developing science curriculum and teaching it, and she ended up working on combining it with the language arts standards. And so she completely integrated all of the science with the language arts standards. In the other 6th grade class, the teacher was teaching the same content, but as a separate class within the day. I want to add, too, that these 6th grade classes were part of the elementary school and not part of the middle school. So the high-stakes testing scores of the integrated teacher students was way above the other class at the end of the year. So because of this, the district saw the results and has chosen to integrate language arts into the science curriculum deliberately going forward. Finally, attention involves establishing and maintaining relevance in all settings. Funding requires a shift in priorities, which will include insistence on the part of teachers, administrators, and other stakeholders to shift to a more balanced funding model for all content areas. Getting the appropriate attention of the decision makers means that teachers are going to need to be more vocal about their skills, abilities, and needs. The other thing that I noticed in the questions just prior to now was the question about districts that don't align the professional development with the research. This is where teachers and professional developers need to start using their voices and really, like the other presenters were saying, bringing forward the information that you learn from these webinars and from the documents, and the NARS document that we brought up a couple times is a fairly short document that really synthesizes all this information, and I think would be really appropriate for district administrators to be looking at or to send along to them. And I see it's time for a question break, and I'm going to turn it over to Ruth to moderate the question break.
Thank you, Ana. So for this question break, what questions do you have about systems in professional development? Please type them in the chat for Ana to answer, and we'll just give you a couple of moments to do that. I see several people that are typing away furiously, so we'll just give them a little bit so that they can get their question typed.
And Ruth, could you pick out 2 or 3 questions for me to answer, please?
I would love to.
Thank you.
So it appears that people are still typing. Oh, here, Ted has one. He says, is attention of leaders important because it leads to more time and funding, or is it important for a different reason? Oh, it's all yours.
Okay, I think it's important for a lot of reasons. One of the things that we've run into in my state is that the fact that leaders, especially leaders within the schools, don't really know enough about the NGSS or even Common Core state standards, that when the community or the school board or the legislators are making decisions, they're actually not able to give good answers about why there should be a shift in focus. And I think it's all of our jobs to help these people understand. In fact, the model that I showed you, the 3-dimensional model, I actually developed for a school board, an entire school board of a district, so that they could better understand why it was we needed to make these shifts without having to show them the standards or the whole standards document. And so that's what I think in terms of attention. I'm ready for another one, if you'd like to pick another one.
So Erin has a question, and she says that, do you have suggestions about interrelated PD opportunities that includes NGSS? Okay, I'm not quite sure what the question is asking. So interrelated
meaning? Perhaps you could type it in, Erin.
Erin, would you like to add a little bit more to that? Oh, I have to read from the beginning. Okay, so it says, I also think it is important that leaders develop holistic plans that look across the disciplines, including science, but time seems limited. Do you have suggestions about interrelated PD opportunities that include NGSS?
Okay, thanks. Now I think I understand. I've actually been dealing with this with a couple of districts in Wyoming in which they call me and they say, you know, we really would like to do some professional development in science, but we're going to attend to language arts first because that's kind of higher on our priority list. And what I've suggested to them is that while they are thinking about language arts and thinking about things that they're going to use, materials they're going to use, that they should probably go look at what the disciplinary core ideas are within the science standards for those grade levels, especially for the elementary grades, so that they don't end up picking lots and lots of readings that they want to relate to science content, say in 4th grade, that have to do with life science when there's actually very little life science being taught in 4th grade, you know, according to the standards. And so the focus in 4th grade tends to be more on the more physical science end. And it's interesting because then these people say things like, oh, wow, I never would have thought of that. It's really best if the whole district can think about this as a package, but it can be really hard to do when they've decided to focus on one at a time. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, one last question from Jake. I'm working in a district that is just beginning to implement NGSS. They have taken on what Oregon has recommended as far as a progression of standards. Then Appendix K maps out a different progression of standards through middle school. Do you have any recommendations as to how the standards should be mapped out across the middle school years?
Okay, that's a really tough one because the standards themselves in the middle school grade band can be bundled in lots of different ways. And the NGSS appendices, I can't remember off the top of my head which one it is, but one of the appendices deals specifically with this issue of how to bundle the standards. And it really depends on whether or not you're going with a discipline-based system or a topic-based system. And those are some really, really tough questions to ask and answer because you have some really strong opinions usually within the setting of the teachers and, you know, the people who have been in the setting for quite a while. So my recommendation is to really sit down and have those tough conversations and make the tough decisions about how that part of the system is going to work on it going forward before you start trying to roll things out. Because if you make the decisions and make it clear, then it's easier for people to fall in line than if you haven't made the decisions and you have to keep backing off and going back and forth and trading content for grade levels. That tends to make people pretty unhappy. And that will be the last one I take. And I think I am going to turn it over to Julie. Thanks for your help, Ruth.
Okay, so as we bring this webinar to a close, I thought this would be a really lovely quote to use. It's from the book, The Science Teacher's Learning Book, published by the National Academies, and it's just basically this. All students deserve to understand and enjoy science, and helping teachers offer rich instruction will require building similarly rich learning environments for all teachers. To achieve this vision, teaching and learning in science classrooms will need to change, and so too will professional learning opportunities for teachers. So clearly teachers need to be, teacher learning needs to be as rich and supported as the learning of our students in our classrooms. So we've presented today that, as you know, PD impacts teacher learning. We've talked about how it impacts student learning, and then we've also talked about it in the context of systems and what should be considered in the midst of the PD program. So you have some new ideas about professional knowledge, professional practice, and systems that support professional development. We have just touched on these briefly. There's a lot more information out there, and you can look to some of these places to actually get this information. So if you're designing professional development, you can actually look at the Next Generation Exemplar System for PD or Susan Locke-Horsley's book. If you're interested in conducting research that actually contributes to our understanding of professional development programs, a great place to start is the Handbook of Research and Science Education. This just came out. And if you're a teacher who's interested in just contributing to your own, to charting your own course for professional development or picking the best programs for you that help you learn about the NGSS, there are a lot of articles that NSTA publishes that are really wonderful resources. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ana.
Thanks, Julie. Oh my goodness. So this slide here is a slide of the resources that we mentioned in this presentation, and we wanted you all to have access to the things that we were looking at. You'll see the eCALLMS study there, or the link there, as well as the Heller study that Julie talked about, and lots of other resources. So we're hoping that this is really helpful. This has been helpful for you, and it was really fun to present this to you. And so for your ticket out of the webinar, we'd love for you to type in one new idea that you can use from this webinar into the chat box. And I'm going to turn it over to Ruth for that.
We would love to have each and every one of you share an idea of how you can apply this webinar to your practice. And so if you could just type in one thing that you think would really help you and that you learned from this webinar, that would be wonderful. And we appreciate everyone who's typing right now. We have some that are going to look up the exemplar PD system. Curtis is going to share the PD practices in his district because they've had some rough ones lately. I, too, as a classroom teacher, have attended some really rough PD. Aaron's going to support the teachers with the cross-cutting concepts. PD for elementary school teachers and science teaching. I see many that are still typing away, so this has just been really helpful. So I'm going to give you a little bit more chance to keep typing before we wrap up some more. Kimberly's going to research and share design PD for teachers of math and science, and Terry's going to give some suggestions for current research that will help him guide his own PD planning. So thank you very much, everyone, for responding, and you can continue to respond. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. And I would really like to thank today's presenters. Ana Houseal is a science outreach educator for the Science and Mathematics Teaching Center at the University of Wyoming, and Julie Luft is an Athletic Association Professor of Mathematics and Science Education for the College of Education at the University of Georgia. I'd also like to thank NARST for sponsoring today's program. And I'd like to give a big thank you to the administration of the NSTA for their support of web seminars, and I'm going to conclude this program at this time.